This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Big welcome to episode 186 of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host David Charlton. Today, while it's Tuesday the 5th of September when I record this, it's the start of getting back into the old routine for me and adding a few new things into the mix. I've dropped my kids off at school to start year 1 and year 4. Well, there was a mixture of excitement and nerves in our house, which was interesting to manage to say the least. Tantrums certainly did occur when leaving the house. And I'll never forget Michael McIntyre's famous sketch where he talks about leaving the house with children can take about 20 minutes, whereas if children weren't present, it would take about 20 seconds. It often makes me chuckle, and certainly this morning it helped me keep my cool when I thought about it. We survived though, thankfully, and for all of those parents out there with children of school age, I sincerely hope that you've had smooth transitions back to school and your week has gone well. Certainly with the government and school's concrete crisis affecting many households, I'm forever grateful my children weren't impacted. On with the show. Well, today it's going to be another short solo episode with the theme revolving around the commitment side, or the commitment measure of mental toughness. Last week, Mark Bennett touched on the immense commitment that's required in order to be a performance athlete. And now today I'm going to pick apart how and why commitment can be undermined by the types of goals that we set. I'm really hoping this episode is going to appeal to coaches, parents, teachers, and of course, athletes themselves. Essentially, that there are two types of goals. You've got intrinsic goals and you've got extrinsic goals. There's an argument to say these goals can sometimes appear similar and overlap. However, the nature of the goals can lead us to different outcomes in the long haul. A little background here. I'd recommend you to do some research on self-determination theory. This was created by Edward Deci, and Richard Ryan. They're prominent US-based psychologists. The details are going to be in the show notes. Now, self-determination theory, it represents a broad framework for the study of human motivation and personality. It's thought that intrinsic goals are motivated by internal reasons or fundamental psychological needs, such as the feelings of competence or relatedness. I'm going to give you some examples of intrinsic motivation now, certainly intrinsic driven goals in a sporting context. We've got the goalkeeper who is having difficulties dealing with crosses. The goal then is to improve this aspect of the goalkeeper's performances and game, trying to see it as a challenge that needs to be beaten if they want to perform better for the team. Then we've got the cricketer. The cricketer who's looking to learn a new shot, therefore is looking to improve his or her game by mastering a new skill. You could argue both of these are grounded in competence, which is a basic psychological need. Then if we think about relatedness, so being connected to others, perhaps you've joined a new team and you feel a little uncertain of yourself. The intrinsic goal would be to look to build relationships, to be more connected, to build rapport, and to feel more at home and part of the group. And more on relatedness and intrinsic goals, this can be very, very difficult for athletes who suffer serious injuries and are out for a while. Something I've struggled with personally after a car accident last November. The intrinsic goal would be perhaps to volunteer in some capacity at your club, maybe as a coach, so that you feel more connected to others. Because being injured, let's face it, can isolate you very easily. So they're 4 examples of intrinsic goals because they're inherently valuable or very satisfying to ourselves. They're certainly not dependent on external evaluations from others. Which brings us on to extrinsic goals, which they go on to satisfy external reasons, and they usually depend on external approval from others or rewards. So some examples here. When I think about my role in extrinsic motivation and driven goals, if we go back to the young goalkeeper, in this case, someone is told basically by their dad, if they play well today, you're going to get a bottle of Prime after the match, so a reward. Then you've got the professional footballer who gets a huge financial reward for making an appearance or scoring a goal. We've got the cricketer who's told by his coach in a grumpy manner that he or she needs to improve their skill set and learn and master a new shot for the new season. Their goal then becomes trying to impress the coach and looking competent with the new skills so the coach is happy moving forwards. It's complicated, isn't it? I'd mentioned this goal earlier of learning the new skill. The difference this time is that the coach is putting the goal on the cricketer here, which highlights, as a coach, asking fantastic questions is vitally important. Now, when we think about relatedness and extrinsic motivation and goals, if we think of earlier when I mentioned an athlete has recently joined a new team, again, the goal could be to build relationships to feel more at home and part of the group. However, in this case, again, the goal might be put on the player by the club or the coach in a controlling or harsh way, where the player's told that they don't fit in and they must do something about it. And then lastly, if we look at the injured athlete who potentially could volunteer as a coach at their club with the goal of getting recognition this time though from others at the club, rather than simply actually wanting to gain that feeling of connection to others. So it's that recognition part here. Again, this is extrinsic because you're reliant on other people. So yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about such extrinsic goals and how you, as an athlete, a coach, a parent or a teacher, use them, because they aren't likely to provide self-satisfaction. You'll always have that sense of what if, and something may well be missing. Personal satisfaction won't come from being admired by others, by perceived power and self-worth that comes from attaining those goals. External goals, you're going to find are often linked to finances, to fame, to appearance, which can be dangerous despite the messages that we get about success in our lives. A little recap. So, to repeat and to make sure you're very clear here, when we think of main differences between intrinsic and extrinsic goals, it's that the motivation behind intrinsic goals is internal, while the motivation for attaining extrinsic goals is external. It's contingent on other people's approval. In both cases, intrinsic and extrinsic goals may actually lead to similar results, to similar behaviours, but, in a big but, the driving force behind them is different. It's very different. Extrinsic motivators can go on to have a negative impact on the quality of our actions, the longer term commitment levels of the person as well. And then you've got to factor in the well-being of the individual. So the two different types of motivations are intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic goals drive intrinsic motivation, while extrinsic goals lead to extrinsic motivation. So are intrinsic or extrinsic goals better? I'm guessing you're wondering. Well, let's unpick this a little bit more. I'd mentioned earlier about Decky and Ryan's work, I always get that one wrong, on self-determination theory. Well, they suggest that we as humans have three innate psychological needs that are the origin for self-motivation, and these are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. What this means is a person's self-motivation as well as their results are going to be affected differently by the two types of goals. And research goes on to suggest that intrinsic goals are far more beneficial for our psychological well-being, as I've mentioned, certainly in the longer term. I'd imagine when we think of our commitment to goals and our willingness to see through those promises that we've made to ourselves, there's an impact there too. And our pursuit of intrinsic goals, such as the ones I mentioned earlier, really can have a positive effect on well-being because they essentially satisfy these basic psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. They're conducive to positive mental health, because we're thinking about growth and personal development. Whereas these extrinsic or highly extrinsic goals, like the bottle of prime, the money, the fame, they don't satisfy these basic psychological needs. Or if they do, it's going to be at a lesser degree. So it's going to link to poor self-esteem and a term I've made up and talked about on the podcast before, comparisonitis, where you compare yourself a lot against other people, your rivals, friends and teammates. So more on extrinsic goal pursuits. There's also an argument to say that they're going to have an impact on intrinsically motivated behaviour, where in sport athletes are going to feel less connected to other people. They're going to experience an awful lot of self-criticism that comes with poor performances, or, well, indifferent performances, in some cases good performances for people, and then the negative feelings and emotions that come with this. Now we're going to get away from the causes and the theory now, and we're going to think about solutions. How can we set intrinsic goals for ourselves or with other people? Well, I'd say step 1, let's write down 5 of your personal goals. Or if you're working with someone as a coach or a teacher, get them to write down 5 of their personal goals. And these might be long-term or short-term, it doesn't really matter. Step 2 then is to consider if these goals can satisfy any of the following psychological needs. So, that's right, autonomy, which refers to feeling a sense of control. So, you choose the goal, not somebody else. There's no rewards for this type of goal, no threats, no deadlines, or any external pressures. It's your goal, essentially. So, with intrinsic goals, if we're thinking about this sense of autonomy, let's consider these 6 elements to each goal that you might have written down. So, I chose the goal. I'm passionate about this goal. I'm curious about how I can achieve this goal. This goal gives me energy and I get up and go. I have a high degree of control, and this goal aligns with my core values. These are vitally important to consider. Then we go to competence. If you're like the goalkeeper or the cricketer and you're looking to learn new skills, they can give you a huge sense of competence. I'd also ask you just to consider these 3 statements with your goals though. This goal is a challenge for me, though I can achieve it. Can you? This goal means I'm going to learn something new. This goal will help me grow as a person or a performer. So again, some interesting statements there. Now lastly, we'll think about relatedness and a sense of connectedness or belonging, which helps us feel really good in ourselves. So again, think about your goals and consider these 4 points. This goal will help me strengthen friendships or relationships. This goal will help me feel connected to people with similar interests. This goal will give me the chance to spend time with the people I like. This goal can contribute to me feeling more connected to the community. So those little notes, those statements there are actually in a handout which I've put in the show notes to try and help you and to guide you. The exercise can be quite tough to get your head around, especially for the outcome-based sporty person who has their head full or fully focused on winning or financial gains. So, if we think about it as well, if we think about culture, culture today can overemphasize extrinsic goals and messages. Take the dad who asks his daughter after a match, did your team win? Because maybe he didn't see the match. The coach who tells the team before a match, this is a must-win game. Then you've got supporters of teams who lose a few games and they start barking orders for the manager to go on social media. There's certainly plenty of trolls out there. Then you've got school and education systems' obsession with testing, exams and rewards too. It certainly doesn't help. So, a little reminder, extrinsic goals, rewards or threats really can harm psychological well-being, self-esteem. Throw in social exclusion here, that doesn't help. So when people do something wrong and punishments are dished out, excluding them from groups. Can't-do attitudes are born in this sense. That's right, not can-do attitudes, can't-do attitudes. Then, from a sporting sense, short-term results or immediate performances, getting a reaction from players, by offering threats are often used. It's a fact, it's all around us, and it's unlikely to change. However, I'd say to those listening today, just try to be a bit more aware of these 3 psychological needs. It really could drive a more committed and consistent performer. Someone who can be relied upon. Someone who gives a 7 out of 10 performance week in, week out. And, watch out for environments which are very controlling, which are unfair, or disrespectful to people, your children, or different athletes. Coaches who are controlling and don't seek to nurture individuals. And coaches who love to dish out punishments, or can be inconsistent with their messaging. Be a little bit careful around that too, or certainly be aware. So, I hope you found that useful. As I mentioned, please do look in the show notes. They do have useful resources in there, as well as the exercise and a link to self-determination theory. There's other blogs and podcasts which link to commitment and to motivation. And finally, a little teaser for you, certainly for those interested in football or soccer. Just watch out for some new content plans coming soon on this podcast, and a new venture I'm setting up called the Football Psychology Hub. More is going to follow in the coming weeks. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.